Welcome to Sectors Up Close. I'm Elena Casas. Today we're focusing on pharmaceuticals and my guest is Randy Watts, CIO of O'Neill Global Advisors. A year ago, drug makers were the heroes of the hour as Pfizer, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson rolled out vaccines against coronavirus in record time and governments rushed them into arms around the world. More than 5 billion people, or 67.2% of the global population, are now vaccinated against coronavirus. But as the demand for shots fades, how much have the drug makers benefited? This is the S&P 500 Pharmaceuticals, Biotech and Life Sciences sub-index. You can see these stocks soared in 2021, but so far this year they're down about 7.2%. That's still considerably brighter than the 15.8% loss of the wider S&P 500. By market cap, Johnson & Johnson is the biggest constituent here, and Pfizer is also key, although other companies that became household names during COVID, like Moderna and antiviral maker Regeneron, don't quite make the top 10. The pandemic also reduced access to routine healthcare, and therefore the sales of some key drugs. So, what did all that mean for the drug makers? Let's ask Randy Watts of O'Neill Global Advisors. Randy, Pfizer and Moderna, of course, made the vaccines that have been used the most in the US, but how much has that paid off for their bottom line?
It's paid off a great deal looking at last year, but some of that benefit's going to start to fade this year, especially for Moderna. Moderna last quarter got about 98% of its revenues from its COVID vaccine, but they've actually lowered guidance recently for the full year for the amount of revenues they're going to get from COVID. It's a little bit of a different story with Pfizer. Last quarter, they got about 52% of their revenues from their COVID vaccine. But importantly, they've also introduced a COVID pill, which is a pill you take once you have the disease that helps treat the conditions. And that's going to ramp very rapidly over the course of the year. For the total year, about half their revenues are going to come from COVID-related products. But the pill should really help offset that decline in vaccine sales this year and next year. If I could mention one other thing that's very timely, one of the things we like a lot about Pfizer is they're trying to diversify away from just COVID. And this morning, they went out and did a major acquisition of a company called Biohaven. They're paying $11.6 billion for the company. That's about a 78% premium. And the reason they're buying it is Biohaven has a very good migraine drug that is estimated to do about $900 million in sales this year. It's already got about 2 million prescriptions outstanding. So we like how they're using that kind of quote unquote COVID benefit or windfall and taking their profits to try to expand their overall product line.
Can I ask you also, if I may, about Johnson & Johnson, whose COVID vaccine has been widely criticised after it had some side effects. Did that have much of a downside for the company?
I would say it's sort of the opposite way. It didn't have much of a positive. If you look at last quarter, they only did about 1 to 2% of their revenues in COVID-related products. On May 5th, the United States FDA advised that people really shouldn't be taking the Johnson & Johnson product except for in special situations because of a risk of blood clots. Now, I should say the blood clotting is not very common, but still the FDA is really pushing people more towards the Moderna and Pfizer products. So really, Johnson & Johnson just didn't get the same kind of lift, nor does it have the same kind of dependency revenue-wise that Moderna and Pfizer do from COVID.
What about the impact of the pandemic on other drug makers? A lot of routine healthcare was, of course, put off when people weren't able to access services in 2020. Does that mean they're seeing more demand for other drugs now?
One of the problems that the drug industry has had overall because of COVID is that it really slowed down clinical trials because it was hard to enroll people during the last couple of years. So there's a little bit of a slowdown in the pipeline right now for the drug industry. The other two issues with the drug industry is that there's an increased use of generics, which really puts pressure on sales. And there's also a pricing pressure from the payers, both private payer and the government. So what we really are looking for are drug companies that have something special going on. One name we like a lot is actually GlaxoSmithKline. They're in the process of actually spinning out their consumer business, which is a consumer business called Haleon. That's the maker of Sensodyne toothpaste products and also Advil. They're going to complete that spin by the middle of this year. And that's going to allow both revenues and operating margins to rise for the remaining drug business. So we're really looking for drug companies that have something unique going on, either in terms of a restructuring or new products.
As we start to move away from the pandemic then, how should investors be approaching this space?
I mean, we do like the space quite a bit. We are worried about a global macro slowdown. We've seen recently both the IMF and the World Bank lower their GDP numbers for the globe. And so we think drugs are actually a good place to invest. And again, we would really try to focus on companies that either have a unique product story or a restructuring story. But we think it is a good place for investors to look for safety as we worry about the economy.
Thanks so much for that, Randy Watts, CIO of O'Neill Global Advisors. Well, before I go, here are some of the stories we're following in this space. As Randy mentioned there, Pfizer announced a deal this morning to buy migraine drug maker Biohaven Pharma for $11.6 billion in cash. That's $148.50 a share, and it's a 78.6% premium to Biohaven's last closing price. Analysts say the deal shows Pfizer is spending the cash pile it earned from the vaccine as it prepares to lose patent protection for key drugs in the next few years. Pfizer-BioNTech have also extended trials of that coronavirus vaccine in China for another 6 months until October. The vaccine still doesn't have approval from the Chinese authorities, despite being one of the world's most widely used. China has toughened so-called zero-COVID measures in its biggest cities this week. Shanghai has been under lockdown now for 6 weeks. The authorities there say they aim to buy time to vaccinate more people, but they're largely using domestically produced vaccines that appear to be less effective. And Africa's efforts to develop its own vaccine production capacity have been dealt a blow. The World Health Organization and its COVID vaccine partner Gavi say they won't buy shots made by Aspen Pharmacare, a South African company producing the J&J vaccine. The company's deal to produce coronavirus vaccines on the continent was hailed as a game changer, but the WHO's COVAX scheme already has more doses than it needs due to low demand in Africa. And that's your roundup of the drug making sector. I'm Elena Casas, and this is Reuters.